Chapter 10. Richter's Ashen was angry when he got to the high room. "Listen, lady, do you know what this is?" "No," Este answered, and her voice was calculated to soothe him. "It's a warrant of entry from the Emperor." "And you've entered. Why are you upset?" "I've entered after 4 days. I'm the Emperor's personal envoy on a very important errand, and—" "Richter's Ashen," Este interrupted, but quietly, calmly. "You are on an important errand, but this is not it. This is just a stop along the way." "Damn right," Richter said. "And this petty errand has put me 4 days behind schedule." "Perhaps, Richter's Ashen, you ought to have asked to see me." "I don't have to ask. I have the Emperor's warrant of entry." "Even the Emperor asks before he enters here." "I doubt that." "It's history, my friend. I myself brought him to this room." Richter's was less agitated now. Was, in fact, embarrassed at his outburst. Not that he hadn't the right. This was a man, Este knew, who could use rage to good effect. He hadn't risen to high rank in the fleet without reason. He was embarrassed because the rage had been real, and over a matter of pride. This was a young man who was learning. Este liked him, even though he was also a young man who would kill anyone to get what he wanted. Death waited in his calm hands behind his boyish face. "History is shit," Richter said mildly. "I'm here to find out about McCall's songbird." "The Emperor has no songbird." "That," said Richter's, not without amusement, "is precisely the problem. Do you realize how many years have passed since you promised him a songbird? McCall is 118 years old this year. Naturally, it's polite to suppose the Emperor will live forever, but McCall himself has told me to tell you that he is aware of his mortality, and he hopes he will not die without having heard his songbird sing." "You understand that songbirds are matched very carefully to their hosts. Usually we have the songbird, and work to place him or her properly. This was an unusual case, and until now, we haven't had the right songbird." "Until now?" "I believe we have the songbird who will be McCall's." "I will see him now." Este chose to smile. Richter's Ashen smiled back. "With your permission, of course," he added. "The child is only 6 years old," Este answered. "His training is far from complete." "I want to see him, to know that he exists." "I'll take you to him." They wound their way down the stairs, through passages and corridors. "There's so many corridors," Richter said, "that I don't see how you have any space left for rooms." Este said nothing until they reached the corridors of stalls, where she paused for a moment and sang a long, high note. Doors closed in the distance. Then she led the Emperor's personal envoy to Anset's door, and sang a few wordless notes outside. The door opened, and Richter's Ashen gasped. Anset was thin, but his light complexion and blonde hair were given a feeling of translucence by the sun coming in his window, and the boy's features were beautiful. Not just regularly, the kind of face that melted men's hearts as readily as women's. More readily. "Was he chosen for his voice or his face?" Richter's Ashen asked. "When a child is 3, answered Este, "his future face is still a mystery. His voice unfolds more easily. Anset, I have brought this man to hear you sing." Anset looked blankly at Este, as if he did not understand, but refused to ask for explanation. Este knew immediately what Anset planned. Richter's did not. "She means for you to sing for me," he said helpfully. "The child needs no repetition. He heard my request, and chooses not to sing." Anset's face showed nothing. "Is he deaf?" asked Richter's. "We will go now," answered Este. They went. But Richter's lingered until the last possible moment, looking at Anset's face. "Beautiful," Richter said, again and again, as they walked through more passageways towards the gatehouse. "He is to be the Emperor's songbird, Richter's Ashen, not the Emperor's catamite. McCall has a large number of offspring. His tastes are not so eclectic as to include little boys. Why wouldn't the boy sing?" "Because he chose not to." "Is he always so stubborn?" "Often." "Hypnotherapy would take care of that. A good practitioner could lay a mental block that would forbid resistance." Este sang a melody that stopped Richter's cold. He looked at her, not understanding why suddenly he was afraid of this woman. "Richter's Ashen, I do not tell you how to move your fleets of starships between planets." "Of course. Just a suggestion." "You live in a world where all you expect of people is compliance, and so your hypnotherapists and your mental blocks accomplish all your ends. But here in the Songhouse we create beauty. You cannot force a child to find his voice." Richter's Ashen had regained his composure. "You're good at that." I have to work a little harder to force people to listen to me. Este opened the door to the gatehouse. Songmaster Este, Richter said, I will tell the Emperor that I have seen his songbird, and that the child is beautiful. But when can I tell him the child will be sent? The child will be sent when I am ready, Este replied. Perhaps it would be better if the child were sent when he was ready. When I am ready, Este said again, and her voice was all pleasure and grace. The Emperor will have his songbird before he dies. Este hissed softly, which forced Richter to come closer, to bring his face near enough that only he could hear what Este said next. There is much for both of us to do before Mikhail Imperator dies, isn't there? Richter's Ashen left quickly then, to finish his business for the Emperor. Chapter 11. Brew takes your mind, bay takes your life, bog takes your money, wood takes your wife, Stives is cold, water is hot, Overlook wants you, Norum does not. What song is that? Asked Ansett. Consider it a directory. It used to be taught to the children of Steppe, to make fun of the other great cities of Tu. Steppe is no longer a great city, but the ones they made fun of still are. Where will we go? You are 8 years old, Ansett, Este answered. Do you remember any life, any people outside the songhouse? No? After this, you will. What does the song mean? Asked Ansett. The Flesket stopped then, at the changing place, where songhouse vehicles always stopped and commercial transport took over. Este led Ansett by the hand, ignoring his question for the moment. There was business at the ticket counter, and their luggage, slight as it was, had to be searched and itemized and fed into the computer, so that no false insurance claims could be made. Este knew from her memories of her first venture outside the songhouse lands that Este understood almost nothing of what was going on. She tried explaining a few things to him, and he seemed to pick it up well enough to get along. The money, and the idea of money, he took in stride. The clothing he found uncomfortable. He kept taking the shoes off until she insisted that they were essential. She did not look forward to his getting accustomed to the food. There would be diarrhea for days. At the songhouse he had never acquired a taste or a tolerance for sugar. She was not surprised at his quiet acceptance of everything. The trip meant that he was within a year of placement, yet he showed no excitement or even interest in his ultimate destination. Over the last 2 years he had finally begun to show a little human emotion in his face. But Este, who knew him better than any other, was not fooled. The emotion was placed there in order to avoid exciting comment. None of it was real. It was nothing more or less than what was expected and proper at the moment. And Este despaired. There were paths and hidden places that she herself had put in Ansett's mind, but now she could not reach him at all. She could not get him to speak of himself. She could not get him to show even the slightest inadvertent emotion, and as for the closeness they had felt on the hill overlooking the lake, he never betrayed a memory of it, but at the same time never allowed her to get even a few steps into the path she could follow, to put him into a light trance, where she might have accomplished, or at least discovered, something. When the business at the changing place was finished, they sat to wait for the bus, a Flesket that anyone with money could ride. It was then that Este whiled away the time by answering Ansett's question. If he was surprised or gratified that she had remembered it, he did not show any sign. Brew is one of the cities of the sea, Homefall, Chop, Brine, and Brew, all of which are famous for beer and ale. They also have a reputation for exporting very little of their product, because they are such prodigious drinkers. Beer and ale contain alcohol. They are enemies of control, and you cannot sing when you've been drinking them. Bay takes your life, Ansett prompted, having memorized the song as usual. Bay used to have the unfortunate habit of holding public executions every Saturday, whether anyone was sentenced to death or not. To avoid using up too many of their own citizens, they used strangers. The practice has, in recent years, stopped. Wood had a sort of mandatory wife market. Very odd things. Tu is a very odd planet, which is why the songhouse was able to exist here. We were more normal than most cities, and so we were left alone. Cities? The songhouse began as a city. It began as a town of people who loved to sing. That's all. Things grew from there. The rest of the cities? Stivis is very far to the north. Water is just as far to the south. Overlook is a place whose only product is the beauty of its scenery, and it lives off the people of wealth, who go there to end their days. Norum has 4 million people, It used to have 9 million, but they still feel crowded and refuse to let more than a few people visit them every year. Are we going there? We are not. Bog takes your money. What does that mean? You'll find out for yourself. That's where we're going. The bus arrived. They boarded, and the bus left. For the first time in memory, Ansett saw people outside of the milieu of the songhouse. There were not very many people on the bus. Though this was the main highway from Seawatch to Bog, most people took the express, which didn't stop at the songhouse changing place, or even at Step, usually. This bus was not an express. It stopped everywhere. Directly in front of them were a mother and a father and their son, who must have been at least a year older than Ansett. The child had been riding far too long, and could not hold still. "Mother, I need to go to the toilet." "You just went. Stay in your seat." But the child whirled around and knelt on the bench to stare at Este and Ansett. Ansett looked at the boy, his gaze never wavering. The boy stared back, while wagging his backside impatiently. He reached out to bat at Ansett's face. It might have been meant as a friendly gesture, but Ansett uttered a quick, harsh song that spun the boy around in his seat. When the mother took the boy to the bathroom at the back of the bus, the child looked at Ansett in terror and stayed as far from him as possible. Este was surprised at how frightened the child had become. True, the music had been a rebuke, but the child's reaction was far out of proportion to Ansett's song. In the songhouse, anyone would have understood Ansett's song, but here the child should have understood it only vaguely. That was the purpose of the trip, to learn to adapt to outsiders. Yet somehow Ansett had communicated with the boy, and done it better than he had with Este. Could Ansett actually direct his music to one particular person? Este wondered. That went beyond song talk. No, it must have been just that the boy had been paying closer attention to Ansett than she had, so that the song struck him with more force. And instead of worrying, she made the incident give her more confidence. In his first encounter with an outsider, Ansett had done far better than he could have been able to. Ansett was the right choice for Mikhail's songbird. If only. Perhaps, Richter's Ashen, you ought to have asked to see me. I don't have to ask. I have the Emperor's warrant of entry. Even the Emperor asks before he enters here. I doubt that. It's history, my friend. I myself brought him to this room. Richter's was less agitated now. His personal envoy on a very important errand, and... Richter's Ashen, Essay interrupted, but quietly, calmly. You are on an important errand, but this is not it. This is just a stop along the way. Damn right, Richter said. And this petty errand has put me 4 days behind schedule. Was, in fact, embarrassed at his outburst. Not that he hadn't the right. This was a man, Este knew, who could use rage to good effect. He hadn't risen to high rank in the fleet without reason. He was embarrassed because the rage had been real, and over a matter of pride. This was a young man who was learned. Chapter 10. Richter's Ashen was angry when he got to the high room. Listen, lady, do you know what this is? No, Este answered, and her voice was calculated to soothe him. It's a warrant of entry from the Emperor. And you've entered. Why are you upset? I've entered after 4 days, and the Emperor